Welcome to the 59th reading of my memoir, The Innocence of Guilt. I'm one of the good girls. I didn't get to go home for Brian's 21st birthday, as it turned out to be Auntie Maud's birthday too, and she arranged to have the day off. Instead, I went home the day before his big day and celebrated with him then. No party, however. Brian wrote afterwards that his mum wanted a photo of me, and therefore I shouldn't think, as I constantly did, that she didn't like me, but I wasn't convinced. 2 weeks later, Brian arrived back in London and we spent a pleasant day together. As we said goodnight, I told him I'd opened up a bank account, intending to save some money for our future, rather than spending it on clothes, which were my weakness. I thought he would be happy. Instead, he snapped at me. "Why are you doing that? I don't know what you think you're saving for. You're saving for nothing." As soon as the words left his mouth, he realized he'd overreacted and tried to comfort me. I'm afraid we parted with me in a low state of mind. The very next day, I received a letter in which he desperately attempted to explain his words. "I have been thinking about you this morning and feel that when you left last night, you were still uncertain in your mind. I regret what I said, although it was said in all innocence and with no pretense to upsetting you. I want to remove the blur on what was a lovely day with you. I feel hurt that you could doubt my love, for with words and looks I cannot express it any more deeply. How can you doubt my longing to be with you always? I am so thoughtless in some of my words, and forget that words to girls count for so much. When I said you're saving for nothing, I really meant you're saving for something unseen, a long way ahead. How can I make plans when I still have examinations to sit and don't even know what I wish to do? All I know is that, God willing, I want to be with you always, but please let us tackle one problem," that word again, "at a time. By all means save for what I hope one day will come to pass, but I cannot say dogmatically what we are saving for. I cannot see that far ahead. I suppose I should really come out in the open and lay my cards down instead of talking nebulously about our future, our careers, etc. But I would sooner talk to you about that. I feel hurt to know that such a small phrase should fill you with doubt about me, about my love." We survived this rift in our relationship, but the guilt weighed heavily on my mind that I still prevented him from doing what he wanted to do. Back in April, he decided not to apply for a Shell Geophysics scholarship after he graduated, as his dad had questioned him about the wisdom of traveling for months at a time away from loved ones. I believe his dad had understandable, selfish reasons at the time for such a question. He didn't want to lose his son. I wrote to Brian and told him to do what he wanted, and he'd admired me for being unselfish. He'd imagined I put his needs before my own. But in my heart, I'd harbored selfish reasons too, but hadn't expressed them for fear of losing him. I wanted us to get married and be together. I would have been content to live in his small room, sleep with him in his single bed, cook our food on his little electric hot plate, and wash our clothes in his tiny sink. I wanted to belong to him so my mind could be at peace. We didn't get around to talking about marriage either, not directly. I began to think marriage scared him. To fill my empty time, I auditioned for a local operatic and dramatic society. I passed the audition, but women far outnumbered the men they needed in the group. They never called me back. I also auditioned along with Cheryl, who had had ballet dancing lessons while growing up, for a group called the Happy Wanderers, an amateur troupe of singers, actors and dancers who entertained in old folks' homes similar to the minstrels at Eld Lane. I enjoyed the rehearsals, and as I sang solo, mostly Doris Day songs, I received a lot of attention from the other players. Unfortunately, I never found out if I could survive the performances without a panic attack, as the organisers had a difference of opinion on how to run things, and the group disbanded. I still sought recognition through performing, although it brought me much stress. To let the stress prevent me from doing what I loved, however, was unthinkable. I'd lived with it in one form or another all my life, so it had become my normal. I moved into Cherry Court, the women's hostel, shortly before my 21st birthday. I'd befriended some of the girls who lived there, all nurses from the 2 nursery units, a month before, going over there to watch television. They'd told me of the pleasant working conditions, shorter hours, and friendly young matrons. I was allocated a small, narrow room upstairs at the end of a corridor, quite a change from my spacious room at Curling Cottage, but I didn't mind. The hostel reminded me of Queen Victoria House, full of young girls, an exciting edge to it. Downstairs boasted a common room with a television set and a small library. The dining room served up our meals, and we used the kitchen to make snacks. The real luxury was the payphone in the hallway, where I could contact Brian. He also had access, like me, to a communal phone. Before moving into Cherry Court, if I'd wanted to phone him, I had to leave the village and use a payphone in the street. So inconvenient, I only did it when I became desperate to hear his voice. Brian soon charmed himself into the heart of one of the wardens, and she invited him upstairs to chat with her terminally ill husband. I resented Brian spending time with a stranger when I only saw him for a few precious hours every week. I never understood why people gravitated to him immediately, and why he so willingly entered their lives whilst I stood on the sidelines watching. I didn't mention it to him, but I sensed it wouldn't have made any difference. Ever since I'd known him, he'd always been drawn to helping strangers on the street, buying little old ladies cups of tea, and speaking to people I'd rather have passed by. This friendliness on his part, though, gave me a little more status than I might otherwise have been given. I became one of the trusted good girls, no problem to anyone, and supposedly with no problems. I would rather have not been so revered, as it made it next to impossible for me to share my miserable affliction of obsessive thoughts and destructive self-esteem issues. Brian was correct in his reservations about my new position. I received my blue-striped uniform, complete with cap and navy blue outdoor cape, and proudly turned up for breakfast with all the other nurses. After eating, I walked through the covered walkway to Baby's bungalow, to my disastrous first day. The truth being that I had never held a baby in my arms, let alone feed one or change its nappy. I didn't know a tiny baby's neck needed supporting. I didn't know how to mix up formula or how to sterilize bottles. Nurse May assumed me capable of all those things and much more. At the end of the day, she called me into her office and said I would have to hand the blue uniform back and get a pink one instead. Instantly demoted. The following morning I turned up for breakfast in my pink uniform, and a buzz went around the table. I said a mistake had been made and laughed it off, while inside humiliation burned. Thus began my humble initiation into the day-to-day work of the nursery unit. Gradually, through many reprimands and subsequent tears, I learnt enough to be useful. I never moved up to blue uniform status, but I did become respected by Nurse May and the other girls. Brian helped a little on that score. He charmed himself into Nurse May's heart too, and was allowed to visit me in the unit when I did twilight duty, a time on my own from dusk through the night until early morning, trusted to keep me company while I ironed the baby's clothes as long as he left by 10 o'clock. 12 babies lived in the unit, ages newborn up to 18 months. I soon became fond of a 1-month-old little baby named Darryl. None of the other nurses wanted to feed him as he suffered rigid body spasms, making him difficult to handle. I wasn't supposed to feed him until I had more experience, but one day, with no one else available, Nurse May asked me to do it. Immediately, little Darryl calmed down, and she could tell I liked him, so she let me feed him again. As in the cottages, it was the custom for one particular person to take charge of a certain baby or small child in order for the bonding process to occur. I wished with all my heart for Darryl to be given to me because I had come to love him, but I didn't believe it would happen. When Nurse May allowed me to be his nurse mum, I was speechless. The best Christmas present I'd ever received. Over Christmas, I missed Brian in Colchester with his parents and brother again. I'd been home for a weekend in mid-December, but rarely did staff at Bernardo's get Christmas off, no matter how senior their position. The children were there, and we were there for them. This, my second Christmas away from home, was a lot of fun though. I went with some girls to Trafalgar Square to see the famous Christmas tree and all the lights, and later wrote to Brian that I behaved myself by not jumping in any fountains. The village home received hundreds of presents for the children, donated by different charities, and the holiday passed in a flurry of activity. Brian wrote to me about his Christmas, how he missed me and looked forward to returning to London. Over the holiday, he shared with his parents his desire to stay in London for the summer so he could see more of me. It surprised me that they weren't against the concept. They credited me with a lot of patience and discipline, freeing Brian to study. Did I have any choice in the matter? In one introspective letter to Brian, I said I was mixed up in my head and possibly suffered from an inferiority complex, my father's previous diagnosis of me, because I was still so unsure of where I wanted to go in my work. Brian wrote back that both he and Barry were also mixed up, so not to worry. Obviously, they weren't anywhere as mixed up in their heads as me, but as I didn't wish to elaborate on my particular brand of trouble, I could hardly complain when it was trivialized. I knew Brian would never understand the torment I routinely suffered, and I didn't ever want him to, as he would enter the same darkness I so often inhabited. Who would wish that on a loved one? He returned 1 week later, and we continued our once-a-week dates, this time on Sundays. I wished desperately that I could see him more often, but he stuck to his routine of studying all week. My heart sank at seeing the cars drive up to Cherry Court, transporting the girls one by one off on dates. It seemed as if I was always on my own. No wonder I had the reputation of being the most trustworthy girl in the hostel. No opportunity to be anything else. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, or comment on this reading, and hopefully you will tune in to the next one. Bye for now.